Hi everyone, this is Dennis Flower. I'm a former editor of various trade publications, now working with this SFG 20 and chairing today's roundtable, which is going to discuss all the aspects of procurement, something that's particularly relevant to the FM industry and several others, obviously. But I thought we would actually start by allowing everyone here to introduce themselves. So if I could start with Mark on my right. Mark.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe. I'm the Chief Executive of Lorne, Stewart Facilities Services.
I'm Alistair Scott, the Founding Director of Integrated Estates Management and Carbon Dot.
I'm Claire Curran. I'm the MD of Linaker.
I'm Paul Bullard. I'm Product Director at SFG 20.
I'm Harry Leeson, and the Managing Director of Profecta Investments.
I'm David Hewins. I'm Head of Facilities for Rugby Football Union at Allianz Stadium.
So, yeah, quite a positive start, I thought. At least we know who we are. So, shall we get started with the discussion for today? The first question is, how has the procurement process changed over the last 10 years? I thought I'd open up these questions to the floor, so if anyone would like to jump in on that one, they're very welcome.
I think it's become more digitised and modernised, and that more platforms involved. There's been a wider gap between private sector and public sector procurement processes as well, I think. And having been in the industry for some 25 years, I'd say lesser relationship procurement-led processes and more value-based procurement processes. So that's my viewpoint.
Yeah. I think things have changed. I agree with you, Claire. Things have changed very much around that private-public partnership in terms of the way that things are run. Public sector is very run by regulations, and whilst the private sector is a bit more engaging, can be through consultants, can be through local procurement teams, and the two are very, very different, and some can have more engagement and some can have less engagement, and there's a very different feel to both those areas.
I'd say from a client side, though, there's relationships are still really important. The trust and that ability to communicate is still really key, because you're not just procuring a product on its own, you're procuring everything that goes with that: intellectual property, service, future knowledge, warranty, and the ongoing relationship for the maintenance of what you're procuring or the ongoing service. So that relationship is still really key for us. And whilst, yes, you're right, we have to go through process, there has to be governance, whether it be public sector or charitable organisations. That's still important and very much at the forefront. So, yeah, absolutely, value has to be up there. Everyone's got to be able to get the best for their value. But the one thing I've seen is that the difficulty in getting clarity in the procurement process. So when you're asking for a tender return, a cost quotation, getting clarity as to exactly what the build-up of that cost is, it seems to be increasingly difficult. And it's not obfuscation by the contractors or the suppliers, but simply the systems that have been put into place now don't allow for that sort of almost the old bill of quantity approach that we had, which then makes it really difficult to get a balance between costs and to actually see where value is being brought into the process. Which again, if you can see true value within that cost, then it's actually better to go for potentially the slightly more expensive option if you know you're going to get better value further along down the line.
I think it's really interesting. The built environment marketplaces, I think it's 1981, I think, is the fact and figure when facilities were born in the UK. But since then, the models, the commercial models that are available and the operational models that are available from a provider, a partner, have changed significantly. We've all got our own competitive advantage through smart tech or maybe commercial modelling, finances, all those different things. And I think sometimes the procurement process and its need to compare apples with apples so that we have a standpoint almost detracts from having a partner who can do anything innovative with their modelling, which is where the relationship piece comes in. And that I'd love to see more competitive dialogue in these processes where you can actually have some face-to-face time, not from a want of wanting to skew processes, but wanting to to convey and communicate what's different about your provision than other people's provision, because I think there's a lot of different personalities in that mix now.
I think as well, think back over time, it probably hasn't changed enough in certain instances. You know, with the level of technology that we have now, that the data that we can gather, and even small startup businesses and SMEs have got great CAFM softwares and job management softwares and platforms that can really demonstrate what they can deliver and can prove what they can deliver. You know, data-driven information that can be presented. And I don't think that procurement is quite caught up with being able to create processes and a level playing field where that information can be shared. So yeah, interesting. I know it leads on. We'll talk about digital kind of roles and the influence of different softwares in procurement. But yeah, my general theme is that it should have changed more maybe than it has.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
I think. Sorry.
You can go first.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And if you go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I think the industry still has a lot of challenges. I mean, if we take asset information as a starting point and the quality of data that's presented at that tender stage and the general lack of awareness of what's in your building, what needs to be maintained. I mean, as joining SFG 20, it's a real opportunity to work with a lot of government organisations, with the private sector, and just the lack of that, having ownership of that core data and actually having that as part of the process from the start, I think, and then everything else follows on, and that's not really changed over the last, well, as we said, definitely the last 10 years. So.
Very true. Very true.
And I think as we briefly brushed on there from the digital and the AI side as well, we're seeing AI tools actually being utilised in the tender process to pull together the documents, to pull together the presentations and the submissions. But that's the evolution that we've definitely come across and seen over the last few years. But going back to the asset points, I think that's the core nub of the issue. If you don't know what you've got, how can you maintain it, and then how can you move forward from there? So I think that's a case in point when we come to the whole of the procurement process and the built environment.
You hear a lot. You hear some criticism around the once the job's been won, it's about looking for the extras. But if you're not providing that clarity at that point of the procurement exercise, then what do you expect? It's nailing that. It's going to really. So if we can help the industry do that, that's where we need to be.
A lot of companies, that they need a specification to start with, and I think that's the point of the SFG 20 standard, but also the point of having a spec to create your apples for apples scenario, because at the end of the day, procurement is about making sure there's value there. So you need to make sure that you can say this cost is the same as that cost, and if there's any true differences. But once you've got that, then the rest should be relationship led, and whether you're choosing the right partner. At the end of the day, you've got to overcome those speed bumps that we all know are going to happen in facilities. It's never going to be, you have day one of a 5-year relationship and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It just doesn't happen like that. It's about overcoming those challenges. So for me, you're right, you've got to understand your asset pool, but there's also things like understanding historical data, compliance point of view, all those things that come alongside that from understanding where you are in terms of compliance are quite important, and there's a real lack of data still there, considering we move forward, like we talked about so much in AI and tech. There's still very little documented history when it comes to our buildings.
I think that's very true. Sorry, I'm slightly worried about getting too bogged down with the tech side of things, but it's very easy to do, isn't it? So I know it's becoming so important. But sorry.
I mean, interesting that front end piece. For us, what we're finding is that the interview stage then becomes really important, and actually a lot of it hinges on the relationship you build just in that short interview period, and you walk away going, yes, well, apples for apples, we've levelled the quotes that have come through, but on the basis of the interview, we think we can work with that company. So actually, that's where it's being overcome is that direct relationship. So I think it still brings back to where we were at the start. That's really critical to the procurement process.
Yeah, absolutely.
But back to that start point again. One of the things I think has really changed is the criteria and scoring mechanism. So you go back 15 years, it was literally 60% on price and 40% on quality. Now we've seen a huge swing of the other way around. But then we've now introduced social value. So now we have 40% price, 50% quality, and 10% as a very common So it goes back to that get that first engagement. The first thing you look at as a client, and you see this. These are the things that are different. It used to be a race to the bottom line. Now it's changed, but I'm sure we'll come on to discuss it later, but it's really how that's interpreted by procurement teams.
It's also very much dictated by the level of knowledge of the clients as well. And I've seen that over my entire career of the variety of capability really within the client pool, and the quality of what you receive to tender against. And equally, your ability to be able to assess what's being presented to you is totally reliant on your ability to actually be able to interpret it. The knowledge base, what I think over the 10 years, that is that as an industry, perhaps our knowledge base has diminished overall. And as a result, we've suffered off the back of that. And probably there's a piece of work, we all talk about lack of apprenticeships and bringing engineers, etc., into the industry. There's a piece there for clients and for management as well. We should all know how everything works as much as the engineers do if we're procuring and spending large sums of money on services or goods. So for me, this feels there's a shortfall in the industry there.
To emulate that, so from the majority of my career in the industry has been client side. And what I found is there's different requirements within the business. So the business will want X, which is around the social governance and all of that good stuff. The operators want something different to then the procurement department. And one of the struggles during my time client side was actually, how do you align all of that? Because the reality is the FM manager on the ground is dealing with day-to-day stuff. The business, they want to hit all these targets, but they also want just things to work. So they're interested in the fact that the lifts are working to get to the office, or the boardroom is working, etc., or their front reception looks great. But actually then you get into, where does compliance fit into that? And where does the understanding of compliance activities fit into that original spec? So there's so many boxes to tick from just a client before they even put out a tender to the market. That they've got to be aligned, and often that's not the case because everyone's trying to do their day job at the same time trying to go to tender, and everyone's got different requirements when they're scoring as well. So it's just a minefield.
It's a bit like the IT spec thing, isn't it? Where you write a spec at the front end saying this is what we want, but the process doesn't allow for the factors. As you've gone through the tender interviews with different companies, you've now decided you want something different. You can't just have the button. The button, I always say that about our systems. I just want a button there that does this, and you want it to happen that quickly, and it just doesn't do that. That's something that I find almost frustrating about the procurement process, because for the client, they're sitting there going, I need to tell someone what I want, but until I've met everyone, I don't actually know what I want because I don't know what's available to me. And the procurement process doesn't allow for that, which I think is where the moving on point comes from.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think as well, I like how you put it, Paul, when you talked about the ownership of data and the ownership of that information about in creating an asset registers. And I don't think there's that incentive perhaps for the client side to have real ownership of data, and perhaps that's where the skill shortage comes from, because there wasn't really an incentive to push for that. And we could talk about the sort of the aftermath of Grenfell for hours, but I think that's maybe something that we'll see on the back of instances like that, where we're pushing for more ownership and accountability of data. Obviously that's an extreme example, but as a kind of a ripple into the industry perhaps.
We're actually, off the back of Grenfell, we're trying to act as a test bed for a major project to integrate the GS1 standards for asset tagging and asset data. So as an international standard for QR codes, barcodes, from the point of manufacture, that item will be coded, and that passes all the way through to installation, maintenance. And off the back of that, it means that then we can actually capture the data as it comes in for the assets. We can relate it to the SFG 20 that's associated with that piece of equipment. We can connect it to any other maintenance activities, and then for disposal as well, when it's been taken away, then we can also record that easily against that QR code for that particular asset. So at the moment we're actually, and also documentation as well, so the O&M manuals are then also linked to that group of asset codes. So we're just trying to implement that as part of the Allianz Stadium master plan, and how we actually capture all of that data going forward.
Yeah, great example. Yeah.
Which is a great start. I think the next evolution for that is competency across the industry, that people understand what certain compliance activities are, whether it's legal, statutory.
Yep.
We've got the SFG 20 standards, we've got CIBSE Guide M, we've got HSE standards. And we are special, and we'll have specialists in the field that they will hide behind that complexity to demonstrate their abilities or worth to those certain businesses or certain delivery companies. The risk is, how do you get that to the boardroom? How do you get that to decision makers to understand the reason we do this is because of this? Why do you have an MOT? Nobody argues about having an MOT on their car. You just do it.
Yep.
You don't need to know what happens with it. Whereas what we hide behind in the industry is this complexity that says, yeah, you need to do this because of this, and this standard's over here and that. If we just simplify it, we would make our lives a lot easier from the industry, because we'll be able to sell up left and right and down. So everyone understands why we have to do these things, and it removes the issues from either procurement point of view or ultimately a financial point of view, which is, you want to save money in a business? Let's go to facilities and see what we can take off of that budget. And you wouldn't do that if you're running a fleet of cars. You wouldn't suddenly say, we're just going to stop doing the MOTs. But the amount of times as a client I've had, we'll just stop doing the FOAs. We just stop doing the 6 monthly tests and the fire alarms just to save money. So it's about, how do we simplify and centralise that knowledge and that competency across the board that then rolls all the way into procurement and then rolls all the way into the delivery side of it as well.
So is that regulation that you look as a way to do that? Or?
I think where we are with what SFG 20 are doing is if we can amalgamate that standard and really make it simple for the layman, so that actually if you're a financial director or sales director, you understand why we're doing this. And then it's easier for the industry to support the client. But it's about simplifying, just make it really simple.
Is there a requirement for further qualification within the industry though? So we expect an electrician to be qualified to a certain standard, but we don't expect a client or a manager to be qualified to be in that role within that industry.
It's a competency piece, and the professional bodies, from BISA to CIBSE to IWFM, have a part to play to centralise this and spread that worth and that competency. And you're absolutely right, whether it might be a professional education or regulatory requirements, but there's something needs to happen out there, going back to the procurement side. Until we get that bit right, the client doesn't know what they are buying or selling with any dexterity or detail beyond, we just want to be 100% compliant.
Yeah.
But no one can demonstrate
I
that.
think that's just yeah. I've seen that in so many areas, and I think probably we've touched on this in the short time we've been together today, even discussing this, almost the race to the bottom in some ways, isn't it? Yes, thank you for your comments. That'd be wonderful on this first question. Perhaps move on to the second question, which has relevance to several of the comments we've already shared, which is, how have the relationship between the service providers and the client changed? I mean, David, you're the sort of the client here. Would you like to start with this one?
I think the nice thing is that it's become, I'll use the word professional, that the relationships are more professional now. They're more clear and defined. We've moved away from things like the Anti-Bribery Act coming in has been a real positive, because it's removed that lack of clarity and unfair activity that was going on before, and it's removed that temptation as well, so that it means that procurement is cleaner, and it's more demonstrable, auditable as a result. So I think that part of procurement's been really positive.
I think the downside is being particularly on the public sector procurement, where the process can now be very more without any relationship at all. And there you get a tender in, you respond to the tender, you pre-qualify, you then put in a detailed tender and cost, and you won't see a person during that whole process. And that's I think a negative about where the procurement process has gone. People still buy from people. That's an old saying that still stands for me. Whilst the private sector, I think, has got that right, and there is a relationship to be had. That's one thing that's missing, definitely from procurement. That's to the negative.
We only work with private sector clients currently. It's where we sit as a business, and that is in the most parts because of the type of cumbersome contracts. And actually, because of their non-moving with modernisation or automisation or even the information age, if I'm honest with you, what we tend to find is that, you know, measured term contracts, 12p to change a light bulb is a very difficult risk for you to take on as a contractor. But it seems to be the acceptable standard in terms of scheduler rates and measured term. You know, where is that light bulb? Is it up 16 foot where you've got to put something to it? It's really quite difficult. But from a relationship purchasing in the private sector side, what I also say is I'm excited about the future. The vested contracts that are coming through now with shared goals around social values and governance, whether shared goals around profitability and other important strategies, where they're seeing more professional partnerships take place, where, you know, I sit with my clients and talk about Linaker's goals, and they talk about their goals, and we work out where the alignment is.
Yeah.
And it's really healthy. You know, we tend to only do business with people who feel like us, who have similar cultures to us, because it is about getting through those problem challenges, and how you act as businesses have to be complementary. So on the private sector side, what I'm seeing is yes, the Bribery Act has helped. It's definitely made it fairer, absolutely, without a doubt. But the personality and the relationship's still there, and I think that's what needs to happen on the public sector in the reverse.
Yeah.
I think it's important as well, and particularly for we advise a lot of small businesses, and it's very easy when you start up to kind of want to take everything, right? You want to bid everything. You don't want to say no, because it feels like that kind of fight or flight mode when you're starting a business. But you know, we advise, and we see more success in businesses that can be selective from a supplier point of view as well. It's not about trying to be the jack of all trades. We've come to refer to it as the Nando's model, right? It's about delivering one thing, delivering that really well, and not diluting what it is that you can offer by suddenly saying, oh yes, you know, I'll take that on, I'll take that additional service on, because that's part of the tender. So that's where I think relationships are really important as well, because then at them certain stages when you're building relationships with either the end client or the consultant, which is quite often the case, it's about understanding whether they're the right fit for the supplier as well as the other way around, and being kind of brave enough in those instances to say that, you know what, I don't think we're the right fit for you, and nor you for us.
I totally agree. I think doing what you're good at is the right thing to do, and I think the industry's been a little bit plagued by being jack of all trades and a master of none. I think, you know, having been in the industry for quite a long time, the rise of the specialist that was some back in the 1990s, where we had engineering companies and soft service companies, was a polite place for us to be. Where actually I think the FM generalist view is probably taken quite a hit on the reputation of the industry.
Yeah.
We're still really reliant now on that specialism of the SMEs. So whilst, you know, the larger companies, larger facilities management providers, they only really survive off the expertise of the SMEs that they employ. And actually finding a good, solid SME who can operate within your environment and support you, you know, through a larger contractor, that's still so critical for us. And having the trust of, you know, your primary supplier, you know, a tier one contractor perhaps, through to that SME, but have the ability to have a direct relationship to them as well, you know, that's really, really important, because it builds depth of trust. So you're not just talking to one face and saying, I want this, and give a price. You're actually talking to the breadth of their contractors, and you know them, you have that trust and that relationship with them.
It's a really interesting point, because I think that's another thing that's wrong with the procurement processes. The terms of the contract protections that have between that major client, that major contractor, tend to be very much enhanced to the SMEs that are actually doing the work. They tend to be on a framework where payment terms are worse, insurances, liabilities, warranties, all those things are worse than the base terms that the large tier one contractor has. And I think enforcement of flow down on some of those terms, it's something we talk a lot about in Bees, would cause such a positive impact if, you know, the clients who are purchasing service at the top level said, these contracts are not just this, you know, these contract terms are not just for you, but they're for your supply chain too. That would make a much fairer space, and it's something that I think we could have really, really quick impact on.
I think that's absolutely right. I think collaboration is something we've been talking about here, and it's something we, from an IM point of view, are really keen on. Is not just working with the SMEs, and I'll come back to that in a minute, with our model very much reaches into that, but also with other FM companies. So there's a number of FM companies we're working with who could be deemed competitors, but I think what we've seen, the evolution over the last few years of everyone working together, so they might just cover the southeast, or they might just cover the Scotland area. Actually, let's go in as a collaborative partnership and work on that. And that evolved from the way we work with our partners. So we are built up from hundreds of thousands of SMEs, from roofers to electrical engineers to BMS engineers, and we have that depth and spread. But it's a partnership. The biggest thing and the biggest drive for SMEs to want to work with us, one, they can actually work on larger contracts that they probably never would have had an opportunity to because of the associated risk. But number two is payment terms. I mean, when you get to payment terms, we can be here for hours, and I don't think we've got enough time.
Or retentions.
Or retention. But we take that risk on and work with the partner, so it really is a partnership. And the thing, even if we are 60 plus days, we'll work with the client. And to date, we've never lost that discussion, which is we should just be paying everyone the same. So from our side, the most a partner will ever get paid is 30 days. And even if they're ticking all the boxes, doing all the right things, all the governance and everything, we get them down to 14-day payment term. And that's what we want to do, to really drive that this is the right thing to do. And when the client sees that, then they buy into it. And as I said, to date, no one said we won't do that. They have some internal battles, I'm sure, but it's just the right thing to do.
It does rely, picking up on David's point, on good clients that see the value in that, and then also confidence in the FM provider to be able to open those doors. So it's not just you sitting at the table in front of the client encouraging conversations around the supplier chain, and then the FM company opening those doors up and having the confidence to say, yeah, look, these are the people that we bring to the table, and this is the skill sets they have. That's the very, and I've seen some really good examples of that, and it's great, but it's not the norm. It's easy to be defensive and kind of go, well, they work for us, and equally for clients to just kind of want to direct their attention to an FM provider and essentially put the whole pillar of responsibility and blame, the goods and the bad, on that one supplier.
I don't just think it's the terms piece; it's the communication.
Yeah.
So for me, it's the and we don't actually work second tier because we really value that kind of that direct communication.
Yeah.
We want to be a specialist partner. We believe we've got knowledge to give. So therefore, we want that. We don't want to hear Chinese walls. It's the whisper, the dilution, the message. We want to share that open communication. So contractual rights are one thing, but it's also that that contract that goes back to models. Your model is the complete opposite to what my model is. But actually, there's a space in the world for both of those models for different types of clients and different types of scenarios, and that's where I think it's right that we collaborate rather than have competition. I think the industry is getting more professional in that way. I've got a lot of time for Alistair's business. I'm sure he's got for mine, but we suit different partners. And the procurement process should allow us both to compete and for a partner to choose which one they want to go for.
I think that's absolutely it. If the client is looking for something, that next level of discussion or engagement to say, look, we really want this. Some clients don't want to touch multifaceted support partners like we have. They want absolute direct delivery. Other ones want depth and that working with it.
Mitigated risk.
Exactly. But if we had that up front, instead of going back to Mark's point, the very black and white portal, this is it, input your detail in here and where you go.
They can't even decide that, can
exactly.
they? They just see a cost.
Yeah. And until you get the chance to sit down and explain it. So I think this is what we have the opportunity to do as a cohort, is to really spread this information out there to say, clients, these are your options. This is what's out there and what works for you. Ultimately, this is what you can get. Does that work for you? But it's that front-end communication.
Absolutely.
The last statistic I saw was the FM market's worth £91 billion a year, which means there's plenty enough work for everybody.
Are there enough engineers to do it?
That's a different question.
Another round table.
Absolutely. That piece on cultural alignment as well. I mean, that's obviously really important for us. Our purpose is to keep the game of rugby going in England and ensure continuity of the game. So it's very easy for us to be able to build that culture into our supply chain and bring everybody on board, and people want to do it because of that. Because it's all about children starting to play rugby and hopefully playing for England one day. But I would imagine for some private companies that's quite a difficult thing to do, to try to get you to align to potentially what they're doing. So there is difficulty across procurement, and it can't be easy for everybody to be able to have that clarity or that vested sort of relationship because of the constraints of how they're operating.
Yeah, they almost. I think most people, when I'm involved in procurement processes, they know what they don't want rather than what they do.
Yeah.
It's almost like the specification should work in reverse. They should turn around and say, we've had this, it hasn't worked. We've had this, it hasn't worked. We've had this, it hasn't worked. Actually, what do you do differently to this? But of course, it doesn't work in that regard.
No.
So they almost end up repeating. And the sad part about it is, in that guise is, they end up changing T-shirts of all the workers who work for them and end up with the same service provision with just a different brand on the T-shirt, and then wonder why the procurement process didn't work when actually they didn't open their arms to understand what was out there that wasn't what they had before. It's hard.
Absolutely, yes. I think, yes. Again, I've seen so many examples of that, both good and bad, unfortunately. But yeah, so I think we've covered this question quite well as well. Thank you again. So moving on to the next one. Again, we've alluded to this a few times, and about the need to be clear and about be able to measure exactly what the service is providing. So perhaps we could share our thoughts on what the pain points are within this as well.
I think we've already started with that when we said lack of that upfront detail, and ultimately the bit we just alluded to there as well, which is what does the client actually want?
Yeah.
If we haven't got bear in mind we're in the built environment piece at the moment, but if we don't know what's physically there, how can we maintain it? And then right through to, and what does the client want us around that support? What else do they need to spend? Without those two bits, which is often the biggest omissions from the clarity within a tender request, you want to hide into nothing.
So too general, nothing specific enough, and
I think it's that next level of competency
yeah,
to demonstrate from the engineering side what do you want, but also just even internally, as we alluded to earlier, what are we looking to achieve with this? And that's a broad brush stroke, of course, but those are the issues. Without those two things, you're going to go definitely down the wrong road, in my experience.
yeah. Mark, you
I think, yes, key performance indicators are often misused. I think they don't drive real value. Some people take a very traditional approach to what the KPIs should be. The KPIs can be punitive, and when bidding, you have to take all of this into account, and I think that can be a difficult decision. I mean, Claire mentioned vested, and that is, for me, a great way to procure services where you're both buying into the success of the business. So it can be
You're almost solutioning it together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through feedback.
Yes, yeah. And I
Very
know
healthy.
there's some consultants out there who are really looking at that as an option, and vested is better than some KPIs. But even the KPIs themselves, do they truly drive the right thing, the right outcome? What problem is the client trying to fix?
We tend to measure stuff for the sake of measuring stuff, which makes me just, whenever I see a tender where there's more than 20 KPIs, I'm kind of like, I'm out. What are you using this data? What do you not know what's important to you? And if you don't know what's important to you, how am I ever going to satisfy those things that are important to you? It's quite a difficult piece. And you're right about the application of them. We take quite large, sprawling portfolios. They're quite geographically challenging. We've got sites in Orkney, for instance. You're not going to employ the same model and strategy to a site in Orkney as you would to do in one in central London. The KPIs allow for that change in model delivery and importance to you. It's the bit about a light socket in a plug socket in a school classroom is very important because you can have a kid shoving their finger in it, but not so important as one in a cleaner's cupboard where you've got an adult moving around that. So it's all the nuances. I know you talked about trying to make it less complicated, Alistair, but actually facilities is pretty complicated. It's a challenge. Otherwise, why would you outsource it?
The KPI piece can be useful if you use it productively as a way to modify, adjust and grow the contract off the back of that data.
Yep.
So we very much drive our resource reviews, how we're actually maintaining off the back of that KPI information, and it helps us to identify pinch points where we as a client need to support the contractor to get through that period. Also where the quiet periods are, how we can best utilise our resource, collectively work together using that data. So rather than using it as a way to be a penalty, that data is really, really valuable if you use it in the right way. And I mean, I've spent the last 8 years pretty much trying to teach people how to look at data, interpret it, and actually use it properly. And use it for trend analysis, use it for sort of key failure identification, and drive off the back of that. And then that then allows you, say, even at renewal points with contracts, you then have real data to use to realign the contract at the renewal point. Instead of just going, well, let's just keep going with what we've got, and we'll just keep saying that you're getting it wrong. Actually look back, correct it, move forward collectively together, and then off the back of that, actually you receive the service that you want and need, and also the contract has been de-risked for both parties. Off the back of it.
I love your approach. It's like music to my ears because I have to say, one of my largest frustrations is watching a portfolio. Obviously, having been around for a little while, I've seen portfolios come back out, and you read the tender document and it's the same that it was 3 years ago with the same asset information, the same spec, but the complaint is still the same in that horrible cycle that doesn't. At the end of the day, the contract should allow that one of the largest contracts we have, every 6 months we realign terms, and that's because there's lots of change control that's going on, there's lots of assets coming in and out, there's lots of building changes, lots of service delivery changes in terms of specification. The contract at the end should look nothing like the contract at the beginning. In terms of its asset portfolio, in terms of its call data, in terms of its modelling, you should learn stuff and grown in that period, surely, which is what you're talking about. And that is fundamentally missing from the traditional procurement process. By far, it's absolutely missing.
I think understanding what the theme here is about, the client understanding what it is they want, what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and also allowing for change in that procurement process, as you said, Claire. And I think that there's a lot of talk about race to the bottom, and we have to kind of be positive here and think echo your point, Mark, about service becoming more important, right? We've in that procurement change in the last 10 years. And there is other ways of understanding that when assessing a supplier and looking at certain data points that can tell you whether you're going to get what you want. You might be a hospitality chain, for example, that really prioritises first-time fix, and you could look at other examples or case studies of first-time fix data, or you could look at the amount of hours they spend in training on their engineers compared to each contractor. There's other ways of it telling you actually, am I going to get the competency from this particular contractor? What model is it they're using? What investment are they making into their engineers? And leading into the digital discussion again, even small businesses now can track that data. Even small businesses have the technology and the software to be able to log really important statistics that can help our client understand the profile and the priorities of that supplier. And then very early on in the procurement process, are they a good fit? Almost before we've even got to the kind of details of the costing stage, actually, are they thinking in the same way that we need them to think? Are they well equipped for our priorities as a business? I think that just needs to come earlier in the process as opposed to the interview.
I agree that the data points are really important. I think like we've just talked about the fact that there's loads of business. Margin is what margin is. It's always been the same. I know I've been around for a long time. But it's interesting that we sit here talking about resource being a challenge, yet I have yet to see a tender where they talk about retention rates specifically in terms of, they'll talk about how you treat your staff, what your policies are, all of those things, but then they're not ranking on retention levels or on employee feedback scores or any of those types of things. The data teams to stay in the same spot, which is, finances, value. Get me wrong, ESG is coming through in there a little bit, but it's been coming through for a little while, and so is net carbon, that's definitely in there as well. But it's interesting that the key underlying things that are happening out there in the industry aren't even accounted for in the process sometimes.
Do you think that's to do with we've gone from a situation where over the years, as outsourcing has become more and more prevalent, the responsibility during that outsourcing has been passed over more and more to the contractors. So we're not dealing necessarily, we've definitely seemed to have an exception here. We don't have the informed client now. They're not able to take those because they've given that knowledge to someone else and it sits outside their organisation. And I think the best thing we can do as industry is help the client actually understand, because the discussion we've had today and the examples you've given, they're all very different ways of thinking that I'm not sure, if we looked at a tender tomorrow, it would be exactly as it was going back to the first question 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the role of the consultants comes into this as well. You know, it's... I know.
He's every supplier.
Exactly.
You know, again, with the my kind of small businesses hat on, it's quite often that procurement process is via consultants and the relationships with consultants. And I've worked with many of them over the years, but I can honestly say I've only ever had one that actually audited us as a business, you know, and actually came in and spent that time to go through and say, no, show me. Show me how you track asset data and show me how your software works. Show me the people that are on this org chart and what it is they do. So I think that there's more to be done in that area where consultants can maybe fill in that gap that you speak about, Paul, and also still offer the non-biased, should we say, role in helping with the procurement process.
Yeah.
It's the principle. We've seen FM roles within private organisations and government organisations disappear over so many years. Now the FM contract might sit with finance. If it sits with finance, it's down to the money counting.
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely an area where if we're expecting people to look at the value add as much as the cost, then we need people to understand that as part of the process.
I think it's the cyclic nature. So, you know, the FM specialist, that piece that happens every, I think it's 10 years.
8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years that happens. You know, we see the rise of the specialist, the value chain go upwards, the cost of the services go upwards, but the quality of the service go upwards. And then we see a new procurement led where they want to minimise costs because the service level isn't a concern anymore because now the service level's decent, and it goes back through the cycle again.
TFN and hard soft
Yeah. You know,
So
you've got that piece, and I think that's the bit that's where the internal client in some cases has lost that knowledge base. And I think as far as consultants goes, there's very good ones in the market and there's very bad ones in the market, and I think a good one will give a client a really good edge of what's happening in industry and what's available to them and help with their knowledge and learning, and a bad one will tick the boxes.
Yeah.
We've actually used benchmarking as a way to demonstrate value in our supply chain. So rather than going just out to tender for the sake of going out for tender, actually benchmark first, and if there's already value there, then actually why waste everybody's time and money going through a tender process if actually renewal is going to be the best option anyway. And frequently you lose sight of the value that the contractor brings to you because it just gets lost in the day-to-day, the relationship is built, things are done as a, don't worry, we'll just deal with that, but you don't actually see what that value is to you as a client. So by benchmarking, all of a sudden it gets brought and put in front of you, go, oh wow, actually, yeah, they really are doing a good service, and you know that relationship that we've built is paying off. One of the things that we try to do is actually protect profit margin of our contractors. So we won't go to try to minimise that at all, because we know that actually as soon as you do that, there's two options: either you're not going to get the service, or they're going to try to find the money some other way. Ultimately, that breaks the relationship. So if the profit margin is protected, then collectively you can maximise the benefit that you get from every penny that's spent after that. And so I used the word before, de-risk. So for us, we try and spend every penny to de-risk it for the RFU and for the contractor. And off the back of that, we've actually ended up optimising the stadium and its systems because we've focused the work in the right place, as opposed to just doing work for the sake of work in order to be able to gain margin.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well. So that then goes back to that benchmarking point of all of a sudden when you see it, then you go, actually, this is actually really working.
I think sometimes you think the grass is greener, don't you?
You do.
You sit there
You do.
going, you know, and it's all about, let's face it, sometimes you get up and have a good day, sometimes you get up and have a bad day. There's lots of criteria around that, and actually, it's very facilities. Isn't it?
Yeah.
You can have a really good day one day and a really bad day the next day. But I think the grass is greener is a difficult place to be when they go out to tender, because at that point you've got a load of other contractors sat by the side of you when you're providing a really decent service. But that contract is going to come in with its different issues. You know, it's that piece, isn't it?
But as we said before, you're just changing the title. It's still the same stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and unless the management are fundamentally different, unlikely, then the same service continues. So, that sort of re-procurement piece frequently is quite flawed as an approach.
And it's also the timings. I mean, we have some significant contracts, £10 million plus, and actually 5 years is a blink. in that, it takes you a good year and a half to get to the point where it's settled.
You understand the contract.
You understand where you are, and you can start to create value. And before you know it, you're on the downturn of facing a tender. When actually that's the point, in my opinion, where investment should be high in services. That's the point where you should have the most surety, so you can say, I know what your portfolio does. I understand your assets. Right, I can now add some values, and now I'm in tender. It's actually that part is something I think that could massively change your facilities, but it's the confidence build, which is why I think the vested contracts work so well.
Is the procurement process too short, do you think?
It depends what the drivers are, doesn't it? So, and where those drivers come from. So as an operator, as a facilities manager on the client side, you're probably really happy with the service, but where does that governance come from? And there seems to be this, I remember being told once this, we've got to re-procure every 3 years. With a lot of digging, it's where did that come from? And it just happens to be somewhere in the ether that, it's every 3 years we re-tender.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason. And if it's not challenged, it goes unchecked, and then you're just in this constant cycle where you're never really bedding in. You may have 6 months of good run, and then you're back into the process again, and there's no trust across the board then. So it's what drives that 3 years or 5 year tender length of service, and then off the back of that, where does that drive come from?
Because it's always been that way.
That's exactly
It's
it.
a horrible answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a horrid answer.
It just is.
But it just is, because that's the way it's always been.
Answer. Why do we do this? Well, just because we do. Well, it's a crap reason for doing something, isn't it? And the same with the procurement process. I think what I'd really like to see is that people take it seriously in setting their spec and allowing their, when I'm doing strategy with the team, I've generally got an idea of what I want to achieve, but that doesn't mean I don't sit there and listen to the team and what their ideas are. And actually that may and does often make me change my mind on certain nuances.
As it should, yeah.
And I'd love to see that happening in the procurement process, where it enables, this is what we set out to achieve. Actually, through our learning we've got to here, that's what we're going to do. And I think the length of the process should enable that learning to happen.
Yeah. I think it's well about, from the client side, making sure that there is engagement, day to day with the stakeholders that are making those kind of decisions. You can build solid relationships with who you see as your client on site, and whoever's managing your day to day and you're held accountable to. And then somebody from higher up in whatever it may be decides they're going to do a global procurement exercise.
It's 3 years. It's 3 to 5 years. We've got to go out to tender now.
We've got to go to tender. It's global procurement, and even your client might be singing your praises and knocking on the door. But essentially, if they haven't seen it themselves and they don't understand it, then it's not tangible to them. So more engagement with those decision makers from connecting the supplier to those people would, I think, help.
Definitely.